Swedlow, and this is Televisionation. Very happy to have you all here, and very happy always to hear from Mark Simpson, who's the president and CEO of Triveni Digital. And there's so much going on in your life, Mark, with
Sure.
ATSC 3.0 and everything else. You guys are in the hot seat. You're in the center of activity. It's just taking over the TV universe. So welcome to the show. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So tell me a little bit about, you're the boss over at Treveni, but I mean, you're involved in so many different things. Let's get the sort of general scope of, first of all, where are you right now? What city
Basically,
are you?
I'm in Princeton Junction, New Jersey, technically speaking. So next town over from Princeton.
Okay, because I originally said before we started, you look like you were in Hawaii in some kind of library somewhere with your nice shirt. Okay.
That would be nice.
You're ready to relax this summer.
Yeah, it's good here.
Treveni, would you call yourselves software developer integrator?
I think that's fair. Really, the value add in all our products is our software. However, many of our products can be bought as servers. Obviously, these days, more and more of all this technology is transitioning to software-based systems, virtual systems, cloud-based systems. But many of our products come as pre-configured servers, and what we do is write the software to make the product do what it's supposed to do.
So
software.
As we just said, you're very involved in the ATSC 3.0, NextGen TV, swirl of activity, but that you weren't doing that before. I'm just kind of curious, what made you guys decide to sort of turn on, to be involved in, to make that sort of pivot? And was it just the opportunity that you saw? Were you asked by some organization? They paid you? I mean, what was the switch?
So we've been, providing solutions to the television industry. Really, core segments are TV service providers, broadcasters, and cable companies since we've started selling products. And really, when we first got into this, we focused on digital TV back in the ATSC 1 days and what the digital aspect of that can enable. Data broadcasting applications, potentially interactivity, all these things. And that's been our focus since about the year 2000. ATSC 3 is a standard that makes all of that much more practical and economically viable. And I think there's a huge future for it. We've always been a technology-focused company and tried to be a leader in technology. So part of that has been playing significant roles in the ATSC standards group. So actually, in many ways, it's fair to say we led the standards development. Rich Chernock, our former chief science officer, led TG3, which was the group that came up with and finalized the full suite of ATSC 3 standards. So when I can, I squeeze in, I like to call him the father of ATSC 3. I think it's a fair kind of attribution. So we've been working on ATSC 3 really since its inception, when it was even just being discussed, what do we do next, before it was even named ATSC 3. And Mark Corral, who has also tremendous technology involvement and leadership involvement in ATSC 3, and our technical staff also. So we got involved in ATSC 3 because we saw it as the best sort of vehicle for the types of things we've always wanted to do and enable. We're big believers in broadcast television and its future trajectory, as they add things like advanced content forms, advanced advertising, data broadcast applications and services, et cetera. So
it was an organic move. It came from within the organization. You saw something exciting and you jumped on it early. Which is amazing, in some ways, because the world was changing and there, all the back channel stuff was developing and the streaming stuff, and still there was this passion for making broadcast work and work a lot better than it had been. It was, I was thinking, a fairly brave
It's a leap of faith, and we're a small company.
You know, yeah.
I would claim that, and I think this is actually factually true, is that per capita, we've probably invested more in ATSC 3 than any other company. We really literally bet the whole company on ATSC 3 years ago. Fortunately, broadcasters are now deploying, so we're starting to see some revenue from that investment. But you know, as big believers in broadcast and what it can do, and also believing that its role has been, you know, really diminished over time, ATSC 3 is the vehicle for this segment to really, I think, bring tremendous value to consumers.
So what are some of the highlights right now in terms of rollout? I mean, if you're following this whole space, we're all aware of the delays a little bit from coronavirus, but things have picked up steam. Things have been deployed. So what's the general plan going forward? Or do you want to give a small history? How do you want to help people understand where we are?
I think you've characterized it fairly well. You know, so this was the planned rollout year when some number of DMAs, so-called you know, television markets, were to go on the air. That still seems to be happening. There is a bit of a delay, I think, largely due to travel types restrictions, plus distraction of the things that broadcasters had to do to deal with the COVID situation, right? They had to remote so many of their operations. So we have seen a bit of a delay, and yet, you know, as you see in the news, many stations are still turning on now.
And you can't even travel, you know, or internationally. Yeah. You can't travel. So I know a lot of European companies are frustrated. Americans going, you know, back and forth. It's challenging.
Right. Yeah. Well, and we're a U.S.-based company. That gives us actually certain competitive advantages. I mean, we'll take anything we can get and all that. But a lot of these are being turned on with limited travel. And if anything, the COVID situation is accelerating what were already natural trends to virtualization, cloud-based operations, you know, more centralized operations, and so forth. So, I mean, I think that largely we're seeing what was expected, and I'm hoping that it's essentially about a quarter delayed rather than much slower rate over time. And we'll see the second half, but it does appear, and based on, you know, what key groups are saying, Pearl and others, you know, it does seem like there's still a very strong commitment to this. I think the leading broadcasters understand this is their future. They must implement this. And the realization of the revenues that it enables is a long-term multi-year project. Better get started now. I think a lot of the broadcasters believe that.
And how many projects have deployed and how many are you involved in? You're probably involved in all of them, right? I feel like the number's 19. But I'm not sure.
Is it, to be honest, I haven't kept an accurate count because it's now changing almost weekly. Another station will go on. We are, I think, literally involved in all. You know, our market share in the 1.0 space is very large. And we have a product line called Guide Builder that has a certain role in ATSC 1.0. Almost any market that's gone on, there had to be some changes in the Guide Builder piece as they send their services around and decide which tower to put it on, things like that. Our broadcast chain, as it's being called these days, the piece of ATSC 3 technology that has key responsibility for getting things on air, has been selected. Virtually every decision made this year has been selecting our product. Not quite every, but you know, very good market share for us there. So, you know, pretty much all the DMAs that you're hearing about, Trevini is you know, highly involved in. And we're very enthusiastic. So far, they're going, you know, reasonably well. Of course, when a tree falls and nobody's there to hear it, you know, did it make a sound kind of thing? There's not very many ATSC 3 receivers out, but this is how we get this thing started.
Well, I know LG is very, you know, highly involved in all this. You'd think they put at least one TV in someone's home to test all this stuff out.
Oh, sure. Every market will have some ATSC 3 receivers as it gets turned on. If nothing else, the general managers of the stations and the engineers. Right. But you know, the consumer market is starting to have product available. So
I know there's going to be all kinds of campaigns in the near future to drive awareness. So that should be very exciting. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about how you are working with the broadcasters to enable the transfer of 1.0 to 3.0. What's that big project like?
Well, I will claim that not every broadcaster in the early days has thought of this in a comprehensive way, the way they should. Okay, so ATSC 3 and ATSC 1 dual operations are actually required by the FCC for 5 years. Right, you put an ATSC 3 service on, you must maintain an ATSC 1 service for the next 5 years. And who knows, that may change later. You know, ATSC 3 is voluntary, rules may change, whatever, but no matter what, ATSC 1 and 3.0 will be on air for many years. And we think that
backwards compatible?
It's not. So that's a challenge, but that decision was made, you know, early on in the ATSC standards groups, because dropping the need for backwards compatibility enabled all kinds of new, you know, capabilities. So the decision was made to jump to that. In fact, that's why there's no ATSC 2.0. In some sense, yeah. ATSC 2 was a backwards compatible extension, you know, that tried to do many of the ATSC 3 features. But they decided, let's drop that, move on to the real stuff. Kind of.
You hear that about the royal family, like, you know, skip Charles, right directly to William, you know?
Well, yes. I won't express my opinion, I suppose.
Yeah, you know, whatever. It's just a funny thing. Okay, right. But it puts a lot of pressure on the broadcasters to maintain these things at the same time, you know, and
yeah. So, you know, a more sort of concrete answer to what are we doing to help? I mean, just something simple to understand is electronic programming guides. Those are required in ATSC 1. You have to take the TV listings into some system. Most of the time it's a Trevini guide builder system, actually, given our market share. And what gets spit out is something called PSIP. Well, in ATSC 3, you're largely going to have the same television listing. Potentially the ATSC 3 version actually will have additional media, images. Or
so we're not going to be dealing with just grids still?
Well, there will be advanced guides or applications that implement advanced, you know, kinds of information access screens and such. But I guess my point is that the core information will be the same. So you ought to do that in a coherent manner. I mean, even just logically, right? So architecturally, if you're bringing in listings that describe your programming for 1.0, you ought to replicate that in 3.0. Otherwise, there's glitches even in just how they look, you know, it's not quite the same information, or robustness issues, et cetera. So, you know, one key thing I think that should be considered is even simply that. But there's other, you know, workflow issues. Another example is stream analysis, where, you know, if you're going to be running both 1.0 and 3.0 simultaneously, this is very complex technology, right? And
did you have a screen? Did you have a screen you wanted to show, showing all that?
Oh, I'm the one who's showing? Okay.
Oh, no, I can do it. I can do it.
Yeah, show that.
Okay. Let's show everybody how complex it actually is.
This actually doesn't show how complex it actually is. As I was saying to you right before we started, it's actually a highly simplified view of it all. But anyway.
Whoa.
So this actually addresses a little bit the point. Go back to the other one if you don't mind.
Okay.
1.0, 3.0. There we are. This shows just a couple of our product lines, so-called Guide Builder, and somewhere in here is StreamScope. One way to think of what we do, we use different analogies, but one that's potentially helpful is kind of like an on-ramp. All this stuff that goes into a broadcast stream has to be formatted in a specific way, has to have certain timing, you know, all different kind of characteristics. Something has to be responsible for creating that broadcast stream. And a lot of times it's actually equipment somehow collaborates to do it or interfaces with each other to do it. But essentially it's a complex on-ramp. In 3.0, I think it's fair to say it's maybe an order of magnitude more complex. There's a lot more elements, a lot more, you know, details. So our Guide Builder system is responsible for some of that on-ramp requirement. And in the 1.0 world, it will do the PSIP information, which there's all these acronyms, you know, what is it? Program and System Information Protocol. It's where the guide information is. It's where various signaling information is, so you know how to find different elements, such as closed captions.
Are you ever going to get beyond MPEG-2 as well, you think?
Well, for sure, because ATSC 3 has HEVC.
Oh,
and so MPEG-2 compression, I think, you know, we're not a compression company, right? We work with all the major video compressing encoder companies like Cinemedia, Harmonic, go down the list. But I think it's fair to say that HEVC is about 4x, better in terms of efficiency.
Right. Okay.
And so it's basically the same video, same amount of bits. You can squeeze 4x or more in. So that's a big change. Just that alone is a significant, really, revenue enhancer for broadcasters, right? Because they can send more. So anyway, so this is, I guess all this is trying to show is that if you handle the on-ramp correctly, you can do aspects of both 1.0 and 3.0 in a coherent way. That's kind of what this diagram is showing. StreamScope, you could think of, well, not just think of it, it is a receiver, but it's not a receiver that you're intending people to watch television on. Most receivers, especially in 3.0, actually there will be custom receivers. There will be televisions, but there will also potentially be home gateways. There will be working with a company on what will end up being, body-worn devices for first responders for communication. Go ahead.
From talking to, John Lawson and et cetera, at A. Warren, that the whole FEMA aspect of, of this, trying to bring in all that data from FEMA is still a whole nother level of complexity, right?
Yeah, true.
There's a whole organization behind that of trying to make all that data consistent, shared, and delivered in some kind of, easy to incorporate way. So if you look at that little cloud at the bottom corner, external authorized alert sources. I mean, that's why 3.0 was one of the reasons why 3.0 was seeming so exciting, right? But it's still such a complex process to even make that happen.
Yeah, it is all complex, and often what we do is partner with the best guys. I mean, in that area, we've worked for years with Monroe Electronics, also known as Digital Alert Systems. They're a big player there. And, we're building systems for the future. All this emergency alerting kind of stuff is transitioning to more, in some sense, emergency information, not just alerts, right? Alert sort of connotes that you have to be told immediately.
If you, if a third party, software developer wanted to get involved right now, and not in any way overlapping with you, like, how would you advise them? Like, what aspect of this? Where could they enter in? Where would they be the most of use?
Yeah, good question. I mean, there's so many things happening now. I think that certain interactive applications could have, a lot of popularity. One thing that I think is ramping up is, taking the traditional, I guess they're called LMS systems, learning management systems, and making those things exploit the power of ATSC 3 delivery, right? So the very cost-effective way to deliver large content. Mm-hmm. And obviously with all the kids that, basically stuck at home, or college kids, distance learning is ramping up. There'll be a lot of investment there. So that's an area. I think interactive enhancement of core programming, I can't even talk, programming is an area.
We kind of need the education now. And it's so funny that you mentioned that, because there was a big meeting at the SFUSD, public school system last night. And, they're at a loss to figure out how to get bandwidth to people, how to get computers, how to get some kind of platform. Right. It's like a real need in the culture now, I'm sure, all over the country.
Yeah, and I think that ATSC 3 broadcast does fill in some of the gaps with the current infrastructure, but not every home has broadband. It's an economic issue, but also even just a capability issue in rural areas.
I think there's even said
not enough broadband.
I'm sorry. I think they even said in the announcements yesterday that they had handed out 13,000 hotspots to people who didn't have them.
Okay.
I know it's a little bit of a tangent on this topic, but it shows you, in contrast, the fact that there's a lot of not-haves, right? There's a lot of have-nots right now. And so,
there's going to be, I think, tremendous investment, necessary investment in systems that distribute educational content to students in their home. But I think that the role of broadcast television in that could be substantial because of the if nothing else, just the inability to really get broadband everywhere in a cost-effective manner. You know, especially in rural areas, you know, getting a TV signal is already there, but getting a high-speed internet connection may not be a near-term practical thing.
Right. And what's the likelihood that that 5 years will go by and you won't be able to really get rid of 1.0? Do you think that's a good amount of time to shed its skin, or do you think it'll happen sooner?
Well, everyone has a prediction, I guess. My prognosis is I don't think we'll have 1.0 shut down nationwide in 5 years by any means at all. Wow. Maybe 10 or something. I mean, you know, I guess we've been at this for a long time, right? More than 20 years. And the conversion from, you know, NTSC or whatever the analog standard was called to ATSC took way longer than I would have predicted if you asked me this in like 1999. So I think something like 7 to 10 years is probably extremely fair. And it may be that, you know, some of the smaller stations, low power type stations, don't convert even within that time frame.
Oh. Should I go to the next screen?
Yeah. I guess I have 2 slides here, and then that's the end of the slides we have. What I was trying to show with this, just in case people are wondering, how does it actually work when you turn on a so-called DMA, a city, right? This is an example of you know, some generic city, or at least we generified it by saying call letter number 1 rather than WXYZ or whatever it was. And you know, in today's world, you'll have an existing set of 1.0 stations, and over time, you know, recent years, almost all of these stations have a main channel, and then all the so-called diginets, because they find they can make, you know, monetize the diginets, and there's extra bandwidth.
Like MeTV here in the middle, that you mentioned.
Yeah, or LAFF, whatever that is. I call letter number 1.
Red Court. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, you know, this is sort of the current layup in some market where, you know, there's the main network and then diginets. And so then the issue is, especially in a bandwidth limited world, after the broadcasters have, you know, sold off much of their frequency and so on, how do you actually transition to ATSC 3? There's no extra bandwidth available like there was back in the original ATSC 1 transition. So the way that happens is one station says, we'll be the ATSC 3 station, and we will host your ATSC 3 version of your primary programming. But in return, you have to host my ATSC 1 signals.
Is that what's going on in Las Vegas when the 3 different, like Nexstar, Sinclair, and who was the third company?
Vegas, geez. Yeah, my head of sales would know.
Oh yeah, they're sharing various, they're setting up one ATSC 3.0 antenna, and and all those stations are sharing that bandwidth. Okay, that's interesting.
Right, yeah, they're all sort of sharing capability, which is almost unprecedented, right, for broadcasters who have
amazing.
Yeah, always been competitors, but now they are, you know, collaborating for this implementation, and
it's a good
and really, yeah, it's a good thing. And you know, geez, a heck of a lot of what has taken as much time as it has is actually even just the legal agreements and how do we do this kind of agreements. Right. A lot of it, I think, is great because those sort of business relationships have been established for future kind of collaboration around certain types of services. Like, you know, let's say you want to send data to cars, figuring out the most optimal path for that over time is, you know, an important aspect of that infrastructure. But anyway, so here's what a 1.0 city might look like. And then if you go to the next slide, you'll see that that center thing has become a 3.0 broadcast tower, or stick, as we often call it. And the main channels from the call letter 1, 2, 3, and 4 are now hosted in ATSC 3 form by call letter 5, but they needed to clear that station of its lineup, and that's now over on these other channels. And I did that in blue. It was a pretty simple concept. It's actually not that simple in implementation. There's all the legal agreements. The broadcasters are mostly past all that. But there's also various technical challenges, like how do I get the content between the stations? So there's various interconnectivity needs and so on. And of course, just the ATSC 3 standard itself is pretty complex. We've been working hard as an industry on essentially ecosystem hardening and build out. And that's been a multi-year process driven by many. And, I think the broadcasters are correct that we're ready to start rolling this out.
And do you have to sign an agreement with all of these different companies sharing?
Well, they have to sign agreements with each other. We hope to sign agreements with them that are called sales agreements. Right? I mean, that's all we're doing is start to sell to them.
It's like I can imagine some kind of legal agreement. It should be like framed, like the top page of these things where they're all collaborating should be framed. It's historically interesting.
Yeah, it is. It is. And so like the little guide builder block here just shows the different license elements, maybe too complex to get into. Stream scope here, I just do want to point out that one thing that we have that I think is kind of unique capability in today's market is our stream scope product line. You can get it in what we call a combo, so that it does both ATSC 1 or MPEG analysis and the new ATSC 3 analysis. And given our market shares, our stream scope ATSC 1 product has kind of been the industry standard for a long time. We'll often get a support call from a broadcaster whose signal is having problems with the cable company, and we help them debug it, and they're both using their own stream scope, and that makes that debugging session easier. And so, the stream scope 1.0 is, high market shares, very, deployed out there. And so we can just extend that into a 3.0, and then you can do both services. So this goes to the point that, as you're thinking about how to do ATSC 3 in terms of implementation, don't forget your 1.0. That's your main business. That's where your revenue is today. Over time, of course, 3.0 becomes your revenue. But
is that the same piece of software on one server, or is it two?
Yeah, actually, it is
two different.
Well, the Guide Builder product, 3.0 in some sense is an extension. In not some sense, in a very real sense, it's an extension of this 20-year robust product line, and it's a different output from that Guide Builder software base. So 1.0 and 3.0 is the same software base. Stream scope, there's less sharing possible actually between 1.0 and 3, although there is sharing in there. But the unpacking, if you will, of ATSC 1 and unpacking of ATSC 3 have less commonality than you might at first think. ATSC is a very radically different standard than the MPEG-2 basis of ATSC 1.
Well, with all that's going on and all the rollouts, integrations, and we're still at the very nascent stage of putting this into all these markets. What are you as a software company looking forward to beyond that? I'm assuming you're thinking, is it 4.0? Is it 6.0? Is it just like 3.1? Or like what's happening in the future? What's happening, in the background while all these other important things are taking place?
Yeah, well, I've used this analogy before, I'll use it again here, is that I think the stage we're at now is much like the internet of 1997, 1998. In other words, it's very hard to predict what will in fact emerge as, killer apps or something, or where the big services will be. And yet I do think it's safe to say they'll come. So I don't think it's really ATSC 4 that's being worked on. It's how do we use ATSC 3 and its full power to fully exploit the revenues possible. If you look at, I guess it's BIA did a recent study recently of survey of revenue growth, and their predicted cumulative growth rates, if you take on the full spectrum of ATSC opportunity, is much higher than if you don't. But a lot of that needs development. So even things that everybody else talks about, targeted advertising and systems of that sort of advanced advertising and other forms as well, possibly interactivity and things. That's going to be a multi-year project, right, for that to roll out and have economic impact. First of all, you need a large enough installed base to get the advertising community interested, but there's still a lot of technology being worked on to flesh that out. I think we're seeing an awful lot of attention now also on sort of non-television, non-program uses of ATSC 3.
You mean like for cars?
Cars, sure, data broadcast to cars, that's one. Another I already mentioned is sending emergency information to first responders who have a custom device to receive it.
What about signage?
I think signage could be big. Actually, we had a pretty significant effort in digital signage in ATSC 1. We had a New Jersey statewide digital signage network. We were the largest data broadcast system providers for quite a long time, mostly driven by public media for whatever set of economic dynamics. Signage could be quite interesting, but you have to also ensure that there's a real reason, right? Because there are other ways to get data to things these days, wireless networks, 5G, all like that. But I think that, speaking of 5G, you're asking what are some of the things coming up. A lot of the industry is now focusing on the sort of commingling or the creation of a heterogeneous delivery platform where you have ATSC 3.0 as a component of content delivery and 5G, and that content gets intelligently delivered, depending on the basic capabilities in the system.
I know the mobile phone, delivering to the mobile phone is either a non-starter or it's controversial, or, you're competing with a lot of companies, obviously. But, Mark Aiken over at One Media just said a couple of days ago that they're putting out a broadcast phone end of August.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious about that.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
What's your curiosity?
With an antenna or something.
Yeah, we haven't seen that phone. There's no reason the antenna can't be built in, I guess, but we'll see when we see it. But
when I mentioned ATS, about 200 being put into a phone or some kind of adaptation to a phone, some people think it's not going to happen. There's going to be too many, companies to compete with. It's just a non-starter. What do you think about that?
Well, our customers have different opinions. A lot of times I just defer to their opinions. Their business will provide the equipment to them that enables it. But, there's definitely the sort of Sinclair One Media 3.0 camp that has used the phrase mobile first off, and it's doing a lot of technology for delivery of mobile. And I think some of the other broadcasters are focused on, let's first focus on the core business and enhancing there. And that would include advanced advertising and other things like that. I don't know. I think, the delivery of this content to mobile devices is almost a requirement for broadcasters to stay or to, enhance relevance with the young generations. Studies show how much the young generation is consuming content now on their phones. So broadcasters ought to be on the phone. So to me, that makes sense. Now, obviously, there are a lot of tough business challenges to get it there. Would your phone provider, Verizon or somebody, want to have a television broadcast on that phone? So, last time this was tried, actually speaking of ATSC 2, is essentially an ATSC 2.0 technology that was delivering content to phones. We had one, who was it, Metro PCS, maybe one carrier only adopted this in their handsets, so it didn't really go very far.
Well, it's an interesting culture change that's going to be happening. Hopefully, we'll see a big transformation in 2021, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, one way that I think people will be engaging with their phones and television broadcast content maybe through home gateways. I mean, home gateways can take an ATSC 3, put the content in the home wireless, and then the kid up in the bed, your teenager who you only see when they need food or something will be up there and able to watch TV on their little phone. So I think that content showing up on a wider range of devices is one of the kind of exciting aspects of 3.0 actually.
Any other devices?
Well, like I've mentioned a couple already. One is custom devices for particular purpose, like communicating to first responders. One thing in the standard, and speaking of us being committed to the standard, Mark Coral actually was the leader of the interactive standard part of ATSC 3. There's an element in there for companion devices. So some content over time, I think, will get developed so you're watching the main TV set, but then you would have content that augments it on your handheld
second screen
device, second screen stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an interesting category. And all of this is built in as foundation capability, but now we need the applications to emerge and the installed base to emerge that will get the application developers going.
Would you give, what would you say, 6 months, 8 months, another year or so till we start seeing third-party apps that'll be able to be maybe 2 years? How far are we away from that?
Well, I mean, it's going to launch with broadcast applications as it launches. These services have applications done by the various, participating companies. Sinclair has their app. Pearl has an application. I guess it's yet to be seen how much content those apps have, and will grow over time. Today, largely, you see most local television stations getting involved in digital via kind of putting their content on websites or other forms of access. But that's largely separate. It's a separate silo. There's the on-air content, and then there's the digital content. Sometimes when we make a joke when we go to broadcast stations, we get a tour. Sometimes the digital content guys are stuck in a closet, literally. It used to be some sort of large closet. But increasingly, that will be merged. And
well, the cultures are so different,
Yeah, so there's cultural issues to even that, but also just content developed for a linear news program. You have to develop practices to make it consumable and accessible for some sort of handheld access. But a lot of that's been going on anyway for years. ATSC 3 allows that to be blended in a much more coherent manner. So I think that stuff is coming. I shouldn't say this, but I will. I think that we've often felt that things should go a little faster than they have. We're kind of anxious because we think the standard's ready for all these kinds of things. But the reality is, I suppose, if I were honest about it, that really without a high penetration of receivers, it's hard to justify the investments at an extremely early phase for the content that would exploit it. So I think that the two are going to kind of come hand in hand.
Well, I'm going to get on those LG guys and Sony and everybody, Samsung, all of these. Let's get on their case to get that stuff.
I think they're doing good things. I will say that. I think they've been. You mentioned the 3 CE vendors have been tremendously committed to this technology from the beginning. So I laud their efforts, put it that way. Without them, we wouldn't have anything, right? Everybody has to do their bit.
Everybody has to do their bit. Well, that sounds great. I think that's a good place to stop. Thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate it.
Okay.
Checking in with us. And I know we're going to be doing a lot on ATSC 3.0 at our upcoming conference on September 9th and 10th. Virtual TV, Leadership Congress, whatever you want to call it. We're doing it. So hopefully we'll foster more communication, and I've got some other plans in the works, which I'll tell you about when we get off this call. So don't go away.
Okay.
You and I'll be right back. Thanks, everybody. Mark Simpson is the president and CEO. And I've never quite understood the difference between what one does as a president.
I'm still figuring that out.
And a CEO. It's just like a double salary. Who knows what it is?
No, that's the part
that's not it.
No, that's not it.
Okay. Well, you are president and CEO of Treveni Digital, and you see the URL here. Thank you so much. I'm Tracy Swedlow. Please contact me if you'd like to tell us what you're up to and how you are, and in getting through all of this strange times that we're in. But I know the TV industry, we're working hard. We are working hard behind the scenes. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.